Troops armed with orders to shoot those indulging in violence are patrolling Sri Lanka's capital Colombo today. Armoured personnel carriers and soldiers with guns have been deployed to prevent rioting and violence. A state of emergency that was to have ended today has been extended by another day in a country facing its worst economic crisis in 74 years. The troop presence on the ground has raised fears of a military takeover of the country. Those soldiers on the streets are a response to this, a wave of violence after pro-government supporters attacked peaceful demonstrators in the capital Colombo. Demonstrators are demanding President Gotabaya Rajapaksa step down for his government's failure to prevent the economic crisis. Demonstrators on Tuesday beat pro-government supporters who attacked them with sticks and rods. 104 buildings, many belonging to lawmakers from the ruling party, were torched. 60 vehicles were burnt, including buses, which were used to ship pro-government supporters to where peaceful demonstrations were being held. At least 8 people have been reported killed, including a ruling party lawmaker. An opposition politician sought to explain what was behind the violence on Tuesday. He said it has been provoked by the government and its supporters.
All protests were peaceful protests. There was no violence, there was no rioting. The protests were aimed at specific demands of the people. When former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa launched a planned attack on these peaceful protests, he should have known there would be a reaction to that.
The crisis forced Mahinda Rajapaksa to resign as Prime Minister at the start of the week. His brother, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, continues, however, as president. Following Tuesday's violence, he tweeted a message of unity, urging all Sri Lankans to join hands as one to overcome economic, social and political challenges. He also warned against Sri Lankans falling prey to attempts to push them towards racial and religious disharmony. I'll be asking an analyst in Colombo about what the president was alluding to in that last bit. But first, a look at why so much of the public anger is being directed at the Rajapaksa family. Political observers have called the Rajapaksa dynasty the most unashamedly nepotistic regime in Sri Lanka's history. Family members held crucial ministerial berths in addition to being in parliament and other government departments. The family has been a part of Sri Lankan politics for nearly 8 decades, starting with D.A. Rajapaksa. He was a member of parliament right after the country declared independence in 1948. 4 of his sons followed him into politics. Mahinda Rajapaksa was for years Sri Lanka's most powerful person during the 2000s, serving as president for a decade and prime minister twice. Gotabaya served as defense minister under Mahinda and is the current president. Their brothers Basil and Chamal also held cabinet positions, finance and irrigation, before getting sacked in the current crisis. And many in the next generation, that is, sons, daughters, nephews, in-laws and cousins, all found purchase in government. We can't fit them all on our chart. But here's more on Sri Lanka under Mahinda and Gotabaya Rajapaksa.
The streets of Colombo burn with anger against the Rajapaksas. Symbols of their power have come under attack. A dramatic turn of fortune for a family that's dominated Sri Lanka politics for nearly 20 years. Starting in the mid-2000s, 2 Rajapaksa brothers rose to power as a package deal. Mahinda, first as prime minister, then elected as president in 2005. He appointed his brother, Gotabaya, defense minister. In 2009, they brutally crushed the Tamil Tiger insurgency, ending a decades-long civil war, and the family brand soared. Mahinda won a second term in a landslide. He packed his cabinet with family members who used their political clout and billions borrowed from China to plug budget shortfalls and fund extravagant infrastructure projects, drowning the country in debt. In 2015, Mahinda lost the presidency to a non-family cabinet member. But 4 years later, an Islamist terrorist attack renewed public fears over security. The Rajapaksas vowed to get tough and the people voted them back into power. Again, a package deal, but this time, Gotabaya as president and Mahinda as his prime minister. But in just 30 months, their grip on power has started to unravel. Experts say their lax finance policies have caused the island's economy to crater. Shortages of fuel, food, and medicine have prompted mass protests. Calls for the Rajapaksa family to go at first went unanswered. But then, one by one, those in government have started to resign, including Mahinda. Evacuated by army commandos after angry crowds breached the gate to his residence. Gotabaya still remains, in charge of the mess of his family's making.
And joining me now for more from Colombo is Ambika Satkunanathan. She's chairperson of the NGO, the Neelan Tiruchelvam Trust, and former commissioner in the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. Ambika, there's a lot I'd like to get your perspective on. But first, how are you coping with this crisis?
I would say that probably better than most, because I think it's important to check one's privilege. And I would say in many ways, in comparison to the daily wage earners, for instance, the farmers, in comparison to many of those people, I would say I'm actually doing much better because they are in dire straits. Particular communities are severely impacted and continue to be so, particularly those whose livelihoods depend on the fuel, for instance, which has been in shortage, the kerosene, which has been in shortage.
And we saw a lot of them attacked by pro-government supporters on a Tuesday. Yet earlier today, in a tweet, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa urged Sri Lankans to, quote, reject subversive attempts to push you towards racial and religious disharmony. What was he talking about?
Good question. It's quite interesting that the president said that, considering that he came to power on an overtly Sinhala Buddhist nationalist platform that was anti-Tamil, anti-Muslim, and at one point he boasted about the fact that he was elected by the Sinhala majority. And therefore for him, and we have seen even since then, since he came to power, how the government tried to use religion and ethnicity to create disharmony, to create social instability. We saw that multiple times, even inciting hatred, inciting violence, etc. Therefore, I feel that the president's tweet is quite hypocritical in this instance.
Now, there are also demands for President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to step down, yet a lot of the anger appears to also be directed against the Rajapaksa family in general. Why do you think that is?
Absolutely. It is, the initial demand was for the president to step down, and that has continued. That demand then evolved to asking all the Rajapaksas to step down. And that is because this is something that if you go to many of the protest sites, and particularly the large flagship kind of site that is at Galface, they call it a family business. Because one of the brothers is the president, the other one is the prime minister, several of the other brothers are ministers. They've got their family members, relatives, their in-laws appointed to many of the positions. So it's a family business that is run in a very non-transparent, undemocratic manner. And this is something that the people have seen, how there is corruption, there is nepotism, there is patronage, and public resources are used for private purposes. And this is why the demand is not just for the president to step down, but for the entire family who are seen to have exploited the country for their personal benefit.
Yet one can't help but notice that a lot of the people who are out on the streets, who are protesting, are the very people who voted this family into power repeatedly. I mean, a number of times the power has alternated between Mahinda Rajapaksa and Gotabaya Rajapaksa. And to go back to a point you were making earlier, this was primarily on a Sinhalese majoritarian nationalistic platform. Do you think these people are having a change of heart? Is there a different expectation that Sri Lankans now have of their politicians?
Yes and no. I would say largely the demands or the protest, at least in the South, because we must remember in the North, these protests have been taking, they have existed for a long time. The families that disappeared, for instance, have been protesting peacefully nonstop for more than 1,900 days. There are constantly protests against the military takeover, occupation and acquisition of private land in the North and the East. So those protests have been ongoing. But I think in the South, it started out only about economics. And now it has evolved to asking for the abolition of the executive presidency and also demands related to corruption. Once again, there is some difference between demands from the urban protests as opposed to the rural protests, etc. But one demand is very clear for the family to step down. In terms of the other issues, I would say, particularly among the younger people, there is an awareness or wanting to learn more about the historical issues, the ethnic conflict, etc. And finally, I feel Sri Lankans, many of them are beginning to understand what it means to be a citizen and to hold your elected representatives accountable. So their notion of citizenship is definitely evolving and changing, and they're understanding their role or what a democracy should be. Those values, I feel, are perhaps slowly becoming internalized.
I'd love to talk more, but unfortunately we're running out of time. Ambika Satkunanathan, we'll have to leave it there for the time being, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And that's it for today. As ever, there's more on our website. We leave you now with images from Sri Lanka, where the economic crisis has escalated. Troops have shoot-to-kill orders a day after protests turned violent. A state of emergency has also been extended. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Goodbye.